In this lesson, we're going to learn how to navigate in the viewport as well as get an overview of the interface of the Sandbox editor. Now, in the last lesson, we learned how to download, install, and bring up the editor, as well as load in this map here. So we're going to continue with this map to learn how to navigate in our viewport. So to start out, we can use the W, A, S, and D keys to move forward with W, backward with S, to the left with A, and to the right with D. Now we could also use the right mouse button and click and hold that down and drag your mouse, and that will allow you to look around the level. Now this will be pretty familiar to anyone who is a PC game player. So we could use the W, A, S, and D key in conjunction with our right mouse button to move around freely. So if I hold down W and I'm holding down the right mouse button and just kind of dragging it around, you'll notice that the camera is following wherever I'm dragging my mouse. Okay. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that we're going at a specific speed, and sometimes this may be a little too fast for us. So we can adjust how fast we're moving by adjusting the viewport navigation speed right down here at the bottom along our selection strip. Now, speed is set to 1 by default. If we want to slow it down, we can always click on 0.1 and that'll change that speed. Now you'll notice as you hold down the W key, this goes much slower. This is best whenever we're working in areas that are really small and really tight. So if we were working on this creek bed, this would be a great value to work in. Now if we're working on larger areas, we could always go to 10 and you'll see just how much faster that is. This is if we're trying to get from one side of the map to the other. Now normally you may spend a lot of time in the 1 default value with your speed. Now we could also speed up our navigation by holding down Shift and W or any of the movement keys. And if you hold down Shift, you'll notice how that moves just a little bit faster. So if I release Shift, you'll notice that we slightly slow down. Alright, so that's how we can move around in the viewport using the WASD keys as well as the right mouse button. Now there may be instances where we want to navigate in our viewport to help us with our actual object placement. Let me say it that way. So if I have this stump selected here and I'm trying to use my W, A, S, and D keys to inspect its placement, just trying to see if maybe it's all the way on the terrain, if I have anything sticking out that looks odd, that could be a little tough using W, A, S, and D. So what I can do with it selected is simply hold down Alt and the middle mouse button, and this will allow me to orbit around that selected object. This becomes very easy to inspect the placement of my object. Now I could also use the middle mouse button by itself, and this will allow me to pan in my view. So there may be instances where I just need to move straight up into the air to see something, and that's going to make it a lot easier instead of using W, A, S, and D. So if I wanted to move straight up, just trying to see the top of the tree line here, I'd have to kind of point down with my camera and then hit back and then kind of point where I want to be. This can be a lot easier just holding down the middle mouse button. Now we could also zoom into areas instead of using W, A, S, and D. Okay, I could actually use the scroll wheel to zoom in, and that will kind of step forward the camera. So if I'm trying to get into this tunnel and trying to be pretty specific in this tight area, I could just use that scroll wheel. Alright, so that's how we can navigate in our viewport inside of the editor. Now we need to understand how we can navigate while in the game mode. So to actually enter into the game mode, we need to get pretty close to the ground, because once we hit Control and G to enter the game mode, our player is going to fall from wherever our camera was positioned. So if I hit Escape and I move up here in the air and I hit Control G, you'll see that my player is going to fall and he's going to fall to his death. So then I have to hit Escape and then Control G, and then I'm able to get up again. Now while in game mode, we can look around just by simply moving the mouse. And then if we want to move, we'll use W, A, S, and D. Okay, and those movements are exactly the same. Now if I want to sprint in the game mode, I hold down Shift, and you'll see this allows me to move a little bit faster. If I want to fire the weapon, we'll left mouse button. And if we want to bring up our iron sights, we'll use the right mouse button. We can switch weapons by using the scroll wheel. We can throw grenades by hitting G on the keyboard. And then we could use objects by hitting F. So things like doors and that sort of thing. Okay? So that's just a basic rundown of how we could use the viewport navigation tools inside of the game mode. So if you want to exit the game mode, hit Escape, and you're back in the editor. Now let's talk about how to break down the interface so that way it's easier to understand. So we're going to break it down into larger chunks. Let's go up here to the top to the menu bar. The menu bar allows for quick and easy access to many of the features of the sandbox editor. So for example, you can see that if I go to terrain, I have a couple of commonly used tools that are also available inside of my toolbar. So you can see Edit Terrain is in my toolbar menu here. Right? Now there are several options or commands that are available only in the menu bar, so we'll be using this as well. Now moving on from the menu bar, we're going to go down to the toolbar menu, and this contains all of our different toolbars that we have available to us. So the first toolbar that we see is the Edit toolbar, and this contains all of our tools that we'll need for general level editing. So if we want to move objects around, we could use our Move tool, rotate it, we could scale it, we could select areas on our terrain. We have multiple ways of moving it along a constrained axis. We could even move it along the terrain itself. Now there are many tools in this Edit toolbar, and we'll use this quite a bit. And that's pretty much why it's the largest toolbar here. Now the next toolbar that we have is the Terrain toolbar. Now you can tell between the different toolbars because they each start with these 4 dots. Now as you hover over those 4 dots, you can actually adjust the placement of these toolbars, and you can begin to reorder them as you need to. So you can click and drag them, and you can break them off out of the toolbar menu and make them into floating toolbars. Now let's move on to the actual Terrain toolbar itself. So the Terrain toolbar contains shortcuts to the terrain editor, the texture layers, as well as our lighting. Now the next toolbar that we have is our Object toolbar, and this contains tools for object alignment options and physics tools for manipulating objects. The next toolbar that we have is our Dialogues toolbar, and this contains icons used for access to like the material editor, the character editor, the database view, the flow graph editor, as well as our asset browser. Now these are not all of the toolbars that we have available to us. We could actually open up a menu just by right-clicking an empty space, and you'll see that we have Standard toolbar, and then we have AVI Recorder toolbar. So if you check those, you'll see how it pops up inside of our toolbar menu here. Now if I wanted to reorder this, I could do so just by clicking and dragging and popping this down next to, let's say, our Dialogue toolbar. Now this is the Standard toolbar, and this is Open, Save, Hold, and Fetch. If we wanted to reorder this up here, we just simply click and drag and try to bring that up to our top toolbar. Now reordering it can be a bit of a challenge, especially if there's no room at the beginning. So what we could try to do is make some room just by adjusting that over to the right a little bit, and then try to get that to stick in there. Okay, so you just need to make a little bit of room there. Now I really don't work with the Standard toolbar too much, so I'm just going to right click and uncheck that, and let's pull that toolbar all the way back over there. Now if you get it to where it's a floating toolbar, you can simply drag right across the header and drop it back into your toolbar menu. There we go. Now I've covered up my main menu there. You can see that this is now dropped below, so we can just simply reorder that just by clicking and dragging. Now there may be an instance where you've dragged one of these toolbars out and you've closed it by accident. You can simply get it back by right clicking and opening up this dialog box and checking whatever toolbar you're missing, and that'll bring it back up. Okay? And then all you have to do is redock it back into that area. Now that we've finished with the toolbar menu, let's move on to the roll-up bar. Now the roll-up bar is going to contain all of the different objects that we can place in our scene. So it's kind of like a staging area. Now the roll-up bar has the objects panel, which is what we see by default, but it also has 3 other panels available as well. So in the terrain panel, we have all of our tools that we can use for modifying terrain, placing vegetation, and even texturing our terrain. Now there are other tools that are available to us as well, but we'll talk about those later on. Now we have the display debug panel, which allows us to turn off specific objects in our scene so that way we can't see them. It allows us for greater control over what we can see and what we can't see. And this can be very helpful whenever we get into very complex scenes. Now the final panel that we have is our layers panel. And this is really, really helpful whenever we're categorizing all of our different objects. So we can put buildings on one layer, and we could hide those, or we could even freeze those from being selected. Okay, so layers is going to be something that is going to be really helpful to us in level design. So that's the roll-up bar, and we'll come back to what all of these different objects are and tools are as we go throughout the course, so don't worry about that. Now the next section that we have is our selection strip right here at the bottom. Now the selection strip contains prompt and selection information about the scene. So we have several different toggles here that's going to help us in the editing process. So we have things like our lock selection, and that's going to keep us from accidentally selecting other objects while we're trying to transform an object in the scene for level placement. We have other things like AI and physics, and that will turn on AI and physics right in the editor. And then we also have like mute, which I already have turned on because there's music and sound playing in here. And I really don't want to hear that going on while I'm trying to record. Okay, so those are just some of those options there. And then the final section that we have in our interface is going to be the status line. Now the status line is going to show us where our game folder is located, and it's going to tell us whether we have an Xbox 360 or a PS3 connected, and then it's going to give us a little bit of information about our memory usage in the scene. Now, just for a quick note on the Xbox 360 and PS3, I've seen some questions on forums about how do I get an Xbox 360 hooked up or a PS3 hooked up. It's not possible with this SDK. What you would need in order to develop for the Xbox 360 and PS3 is you would need a specific license to develop for it, and then you would also need a development kit for that as well. You can't just hook up your own home console. All right, so we've gone ahead and we've broken down the interface into larger chunks, and like I said, as we go throughout this course, we're going to get into some of the specific tools and begin breaking it down even more. Now in our next lesson, we're going to get started with our level creation by talking about how to generate terrain. So I'll see you then.